started recording the session. So the slides and the recording for this session will be available if you are a registered graduate student, and it's available on Brightspace. There is a shell called the Hmong Graduate Commons. My experience has been that most graduate students have seen this shell, but they have not opened it. So it's a wealth of information for graduate students. And if you go in on the left-hand side, you'll see Edge recordings and slides. So to answer your questions about that, not only these slides and recordings, but others are there as well. So I have my previous slides and recordings for this session, but what I'll do is I'll take those down and replace it with the new slides. Okay, we'll get started. This is just some information. I already put my email in the chat. There's the Edge website, which is going to be very important, the School of Graduate Studies, and of course, the Become a Graduate Student website. And I put that here for the benefit of any undergrads, alumni. I forgot to mention that too. This is open to all alumni. Anyone who wants to find out more about graduate studies, I have these resources here as well. I think the biggest thing to note is you need to know the difference between a resume and a CV, because that causes a lot of confusion. Resume is what, because we have a separate presentation for CV that I have a faculty member do because it is more of an academic document. Resume is more mainstream. It's usually what you need when you're applying for jobs in industry, for example, anything that's not in academia. These points are, general rules. We usually try to keep it at 2 pages, can be 3, depending. And you'll hear all kinds of opinions on this. And that's actually one thing that I should note before I go any further. There's so many opinions on how to do resumes. These are just suggestions we recommend based on best practices, based on my experience with employers, based on the best way to communicate your skills. So some of this information may be conflicting. You'll hear so many different things. It generally doesn't include a lot of detailed academic information unrelated to the position. So by this, I mean, if you have publications, conferences attended, more academic focused categories, they're not normally included in a resume. It's usually for entry, as I've said, entry-level non-academic positions, widely accepted, very mainstream, and it provides more of a brief summary of skills, qualifications, and experience directly relevant to the position, and that's important as well. Just very quickly, I just include this so you know the difference. A CV can be much longer because obviously if you're applying for an academic position or for funding or for awards, you're going to want to include details that give, show your full potential. It's a scholar, so it's used in, academic job search, research, and schooling. And this, of course, does normally include categories like publications, conference presentations, teaching experience, grants. So it's really more of a complete history of your achievements. So it does have its place. And sometimes when you're applying for something, it could require kind of a combo. So you're probably using a resume, but you're making it a little bit more academic depending on what you're applying for. So I do have links throughout this presentation. We'll see at the end how many I have time to open. As I said, these slides and the recording will be on the Hmong Graduate Commons on Brightspace afterwards anyway. So this is just a link that talks about how long recruiters look at resumes. And I guess the point from this is that it's not so much that it's 7.4 seconds, because that changes, I think, every time they do that study. But just to know that resumes are scanned very, very quickly. And usually there's a lot received to employers. So that's why presentations like this are so important, because you really want your resume to be tailored to the job so it actually gets read. So I'm not going to go in and out of the links. what I'll do is I do have them open on my computer. So at the end of the presentation, I will choose a few to go into. This is actually a link from the Edge website. And in this category, finishing your degree, preparing your career, this is where you'll find a PDF of the actual resume guide. So I'll refer to that later. I just want you to know that that's where that is. There's two main formats of a resume. Most common, most popular, I'm going to say, is the chronological format. The combination hybrid also has its place, but it's more skills based. There are examples of both in the MUN resume guide. However, I did include this link here. Balanced Careers often gives some good descriptions of the different resume types. Chronological resume is pretty straightforward. It focuses on chronological work experience. So it's normally your most recent work experience, your most recent degree, right from the top to the bottom. No major gaps in employment history. Usually your work history is directly related to the position, reflects your growth, and it is the most widely used format. It's the typical style resume that you see. Combination is suitable for emphasizing both experience and skills, suitable in most circumstances, highlights both relevant skills and work experience, and is kind of useful when changing jobs within the same industry as well. So it looks much like a chronological resume. It's just a bit different at the top. These are some little things. So some of these more practical things I will go through a little bit more quickly. But just keep in mind that, these days your mailing address is optional. You can include it if you want. Make sure your email address is professional. By professional, I just mean that it's not a foolish email address with some silly names and numbers in it. As long as it has, usually your name, if it's your MUN email, just any kind of a straightforward professional email that you use and you will check regularly. And for the benefit, of everybody, but particularly international students, because resumes are done differently in different countries, and sometimes they're not even called resumes, they're called CVs. You definitely don't want to include these types of things here. So this is not an exhaustive list, but you don't want to include anything personal. Birth, marital status, you don't need your age, you don't need a photo, social insurance number, absolutely not. You don't want to provide any of those things. And when you're applying for jobs in Canada, employers cannot ask you these things until you're hired, when you're filling out forms and contracts. You wouldn't offer this up in a resume. These are the basic resume components. So you can think of these as the top to the bottom of your resume. So, you have your contact information at the top. There's always a part at the top that's either highlights qualifications or a summary. That's very important because that's the part that should match the job. And then there's other sections depending on who you are, how much experience you have, your program. You generally have your education and work experience if you have it, but there can be many additional sections. So it could be, volunteer experience, it could be professional development, it could be technical certifications. That's going to be very individual and depend on what you yourself have. References only if requested. So you don't need to include references for professional jobs unless it's requested, and it's generally not. And these days, even though in our resume template, we do have at the bottom references available upon request. These days, I don't even know if you need to put that in. It's assumed that you're going to have references, and especially if you're trying to save space. These are the highlights of qualifications for the chronological format, and I'll give you a sample. So these are your top selling points. So these are skills experience from the job description. And I have in bold, it should be tailored to each position. That's the most important part to know. You want to avoid general statements, things like, using personal pronouns. I was responsible for, you want to have bulleted points stating exactly your skills and your experience and where you got those skills and experience. And again, the main thing is that when you're looking at the job ad, it needs to match at the top. And it's normally 4 to 6 bullet points. It can depend on the job you're applying for. Just to give you a bit of insight on the other format, the hybrid format, a little bit more detail. So if you're applying for a job that you may not be a perfect fit for, but you know you have the skills to apply to that job, transferable skills, you may want to have at the top some of your skill sets instead of your highlights of qualifications. And again, it needs to be tailored to each position. Here's an example of what I mean by reverse chronological order. So under education, want to have your degree bold. You want your degree first, so that stands out. Again, this goes back to what I was saying about ease of reading and formatting. You have your institution names there underneath. You don't use numerical dates, and by that I mean, you know, 01, 26, 22. Not that that's wrong, but for ease of reading, you want to make it as easy as possible for them to scan a resume. So you can see, your current degree would be the date you started to present, and then anything else would go underneath. And you can just put your date of graduation there if you like, but you can see the consistency here so that it's very, very easy to read. No need to list courses or GPA unless there's just a specific reason. I mean, if you want to list your GPA, you can. But there's no real need. It may be different if you're doing a CV. Experience, again, reverse chronological order. You bold your job titles, just like you would bold your degree. You include this information here, the name of the employer, location, and date. In the resume guide, we actually have a good list of action verbs that you can use to introduce your duties, what you do. But I've also included a couple of extra links as well that are a little bit more comprehensive. Some powerful verbs like this one here, for example, that really stand out and can help you describe your resume. Your jobs. If you have extensive short-term work, and this is a common question I get for folks who have a lot of part-time work. I mean, if you put everything in, your resume would be like 10 pages long. If you do, and it's similar work, you can actually group it together in a date set. So you can have, the work on the left-hand side, and then you can have a date set on the right. So you're grouping it together, so that will help a bit. I will definitely be going into this link after the presentation is over. Just keeping an eye on the time. This is important. So if you could shift your thinking in this way, whether you're writing your cover letter, your resume, in an interview, in conversations with employers, keep in mind that, you may have a lot of great experience and a lot of skills. However, the way you talk about that skills and experience can make a huge difference. And it doesn't have to be long. So I just gave a couple of examples here. So you can say, as one of your duties, developed a policy manual, which is fine, right? You're saying what you did. But developed a policy manual which reduced training time for staff. That's a lot more impactful and actually has a result, has an accomplishment. A more academic example here below, wrote a research paper on a certain topic. Again, that's fine as it is, but wrote that paper and were asked to present it at an international conference. Again, it's not that much longer a sentence, but it's a lot more impactful. And I should note as well that it's not always easy to do this. Some duties are duties. They're just straightforward. You can't really write them as accomplishment statements. This is something for you to think about as you're going through your documents. And this link that I'll go into after gives some really good examples. And what I like about this link is that it gives quantitative and qualitative examples of describing your duties. Here are some of the additional sections that I mentioned. This is not an exhaustive list, and it depends on what you have and what you want to call them, and how you want to group them. I do note that volunteer experience should use the same format as work experience because it's just as important. You may not be paid for it, but it's the same. You're still gaining these skills and experience. You could have memberships, you could have awards, achievements, additional training, certifications, professional development. Like it really depends on your program and how much you've done, how much experience you have outside your program. I talked about this a bit already. List references only if requested. Otherwise, you can indicate references available upon request if you want. If they're included, that would be separate from your resume, so you don't have to include that in length. Seek permission and recent permission before listing someone as a reference. That's important. And some of these points I know seem very obvious and basic, but I've been contacted, I've agreed to be references for people and been contacted right out of the blue, and I have no idea that I'm still listed as a reference. So if I know, if I'm given a heads up and I know ahead of time, I can probably give that person a better reference because I can reach out to them, ask them what they've been doing lately, maybe ask for a copy of their resume, that sort of thing. Which brings me to providing a copy of your resume and job description if you're invited for an interview for your references. And if it wasn't included, you can bring it to an interview. So again, these are all about organizational skills, preparation, and really, helping yourself along because you can really help your references by providing them with their information that they need. Just some extra tips. 2 pages is ideal. There are exceptions, so don't get really caught up with that. It's always nice to include your name and page number on each page, except the first page. Use a minimum 11 font size. So don't use a 9 or 10 because you want to cram everything into 2 pages because it goes back to readability. It's much too hard to read. Your headings can be bigger, of course, than that. And if you can use a 12, that's great. But you definitely don't want to go below a 11. Use professional fonts. This is really a personal preference. Arial or Calibri are generally what I use and what I would recommend. This is a link that talks about the best fonts. Times New Roman. I personally don't like Times New Roman in these types of documents. I know it's a font that for referencing programs, academic reasons that many have to use, and that's fine. But for readability, it's usually some of the other fonts that are just cleaner. And also, Times New Roman 11 font is kind of small compared to the others. Keep formatting and spacing consistent. Again, this is like some of the most basic things that I know I'm mentioning, but they're some of the biggest issues that I see in documents. Leave white space. Don't cram everything together. Don't use paragraphs. Keep that for your cover letter. Use bullet statements. And always, always, always proofread for errors or have someone else proofread for errors. You may have a great document, but if there's errors at all, that's going to be a real deterrent for most employers. Just going to go into the cover letter a bit. Oops. So this is the purpose of a cover letter. Highlight the experience, skills, and strengths that are directly relevant to the position you're applying for. I get asked that a lot, like, why do I need to do a cover letter? I have the highlights of qualifications. It explains things in detail. But really, this is a more comprehensive way of really honing in on the skills and strengths and experience that you have that match the job. And something else as well, it's a sample of your writing. We know that communication skills are probably one of the top 10, skills that, if not the top skills that employers are looking for. Writing, for sure. Employers have said to me, I just want a cover letter because I want to know they can write. So keep that in mind too. And if you're concerned or you feel that you need help with sentence structure or grammar or anything like that, the Writing Center actually helps students with these types of documents as well, not just academic documents. So keep that in mind because many don't realize that. So if you do want to have the Writing Center review your documents, you can do that. Again, this is just very straightforward. This is generally what the cover letter should include. So think of this as the actual format from top to bottom of the cover letter. Go into this in a bit more detail. You have your address. Some people don't include their address these days in a formal letter. Normally you do. You have the date. I even have, the spacing mentioned here because sometimes I notice that folks have letters that run together. Address a specific individual if possible. Most of the times it's not possible. You would normally say things like the person's full name or HR manager, hiring committee, selection committee. The only thing I would avoid using is to whom it may concern. It's not really that it's wrong, but it's just kind of vague. And again, just assert a colon instead of a comma after this comma after the salutation. Just it's a sign of a formal letter. So first and last paragraphs should be fairly straightforward. Should be the easiest part to write. You're really stating why you're writing, how you learned about the job posting. And if you don't have a job posting, in this case, you may be just inquiring about availability. This is where you would want to state this as well. Second paragraph, what do you have to offer? So, and also a reminder that everything I'm talking about here is in the resume guide in great detail and samples. And I will show that before we finish the presentation. Provide specific information about your qualifications, experience, and skills and how these will benefit the employer. So it's not a time to talk about how great the employer is. And, I've always wanted to be a part of your company and, you do this and you do that. And there's nothing wrong maybe with including some of that in your letter, but you need to tell them how you're going to benefit them. And this is your opportunity. And also respond to every possible requirement that is listed in the job posting. Obviously, the requirements you don't have, you can't exactly do that. The way I have gotten around this, my own career experience, is I know when I wanted to get into career development, for example, in my cover letter, I was constantly saying things like, I am eager to transfer my skills to this area. So I have skills in this area, program development, and I'm eager to transfer them to career development. So it was very clear that, I recognize that I may not be a perfect match, but, I had all kinds of other skills and experience so that I could apply. And that's something that you want to keep in mind. Are you a good fit for this employer, which may seem like a repeat of the second paragraph, but it's really an opportunity to, if there's something in particular, like if your research area is a perfect match, what you're applying to, if you have, there's certain software that they rely on that you know very well, this is where you would make the connection. I know a bit about you. I recognize, you've at least been on their website. You know things like their mission, vision, and values, for example. And if you can relate to those, you can mention it. But it really parallels what's important about you to them. So this is your opportunity to really pull something out. That's common. And there's a sample in the resume guide of a letter that does this. Again, this is straightforward. Fourth paragraph, concluding and requesting an interview. Some of the typical phrases you might have seen: state how you can be reached. This is where you would put your phone number and email, and just thanking them for their consideration. So it doesn't have to be wordy or elaborate. It does need to be well written and succinct. And most of all, tailored to the job. And I know many who have heard me present before, I'm sure must be sick of hearing me say that. But that is the main point to remember for sure for this whole presentation. This just covers the ending, sincerely, yours truly, thank you. It's a personal preference. I generally say sincerely. You have your signature. It's always a nice touch to use an electronic signature. So you have, sincerely, and then you have a space where you put your electronic signature, and then you have your name typed underneath. From the top to the bottom, your letter looks professional, and clean and easy to read. So that's an option as well. It's not wrong if you don't use an electronic signature, but these are just some of the little tips. Again, this is similar to what I said about the resume. Tailor, tailor, tailor each cover letter to the position you're applying for. Limit it to 1 page in the case of industry. Academics is a different. So if you're applying for an academic position, your letter is probably going to be 2 pages. You're going to be talking about your teaching experience, your research experience, that type of thing. But for something that's going with a resume and you're applying for industry, typically you don't want it to go any more than 1 page. I've already mentioned use minimum 11 font size. Your font size should match both the cover letter and the resume. Professional fonts. Again, this is a personal preference. I like Calibri myself. Arial's good too. For obvious reasons, you wouldn't use something like Comic Sans, for example, something that's really informal looking. Ensure that the employer's name and title of the position are consistent throughout the letter. So if you have an employer's name and then you have an acronym of that company, you may use the full employer's name, then the acronym in brackets, and then throughout the rest of your document, you're using the acronym. So just for consistency, make sure that your first reference is always writing it out fully, similar to academic papers as well. Don't forget to sign it. Said always a good idea. And again, another thing that seems very obvious, but I can't emphasize it enough, always proofread for errors or have someone else proofread or go to the writing center. These are other links that most of these are on the Edge website. I think the last 3 definitely. This is a good one. It really tells you how to decode a job posting. So what you should be, looking at, how you should be looking at it. And don't underestimate the value of a job posting. Many students will say to me, well, I don't know what they're looking for, but it's all there, unless it's badly written. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's vague. But usually you can go through that and literally highlight either on your computer or physically what it is they're looking for. And when you have all those things highlighted, that's what you're inputting into your letter and the top of your resume. I add these to many of my presentations. These are not directly relevant to resume or cover letter, but we know that networking, mentorship is a huge part of career development, finding meaningful work. I want to make sure that you know about 10,000 Coffees, which is a platform that can help you build your network. Student Life has it set up, and there's the link. I could go into this at the end as well. It's almost like I guess the short version for me to describe it without going into detail. It's almost like an internal LinkedIn. So you sign up. The people who are in the database are usually students and alumni. So you can actually reach out to folks who may have a similar background to you, who may be working in a company that you're interested in, that sort of thing. Another resource similar to this is Global NL, where it's not as, I guess, structured as the 10,000 Coffees. Definitely something you should know about, though. You can sign up for this directly using your LinkedIn. And it's really folks who promotes connections for people who are in Newfoundland and Labrador, outside Newfoundland and Labrador, it could be anywhere. So you may just want to peruse that website and have a look, see how that can benefit you. This is what I want to spend the rest of my time talking about. So the website Enhanced Development of the Graduate Experience tells you everything you'll need to know about career development, job search, anything to do with finding work and finding meaningful work that's related to your programs. This is a general definition, offers workshops, resources designed to help graduate students and others, I would add, build diverse skills and competencies to be successful in grad school and beyond. We put it all in the one place. We know that grad students are busy. and you'll see that also we have social media, Twitter and Facebook. To be honest, Twitter is definitely the most effective channel to follow when it comes to Edge. If there's job postings that come up, networking events, reminders for Edge events, anything at all that I think could be beneficial for career development, I post it on Twitter. I try to be consistent with Facebook, but usually Twitter is where I would post most of these things. Another good place to follow on Twitter would be Mon Career. So that's the student life Mon Career. I often retweet their things anyway, but it's a good practice to follow them as well. And of course, there's the Edge website. Very, very simple. It's a microsite, straightforward. It's not linked to the grad studies site. If I can say, I guess emphasize anything at all, it's never too late. So if you're at the end of your program, it's great that you know about this now, but it's ideal if you can explore this website at the beginning of your program. You will find yourself to be less stressed, more confident, more hopeful towards the end of your program if you kind of dig into some of the things that are freely available to you. So, I think I'm going to just ask before I go into some links and just get into what I think is most important in Edge. I'm just going to ask if there's any questions. Stop sharing this for a minute. See anything in the chat? Feel free to unmute your mic the way as well.
Julie, may I ask a question?
Yeah, just
Yeah.
I do, before you do, I have a private question here asking me to share the
Sure.
links in the chat. So I won't be able to share the links in the chat because there's too many of them. But if you're a graduate student, you will be able to have access to this presentation through the Graduate Commons on Brightspace and also the recording. If you're not a graduate student, just email me and let me know, and I'll make sure that I get the presentation to you. Go ahead, Ali.
Yeah. So just a general question: how important is that to be in the location? Let's say you want to apply for a job in Ontario. Is it important that you will be there, or because I have heard if you have the address there, then you will get. It's more probable that you get the interview. Is that right, or?
I don't know, to be honest, because I don't have any evidence that it is. My opinion is that, if I was applying for jobs, I was in Newfoundland, I was applying for jobs in Ontario, I wouldn't include my address. I don't think there's really any need to, and I think it's given that most people these days are applying for jobs globally anyway. And I wouldn't want, if I got a resume, I know myself, I would make the assumption, oh, well, they'll move. But maybe folks won't. Maybe that'll be a hindrance, right? So instead of putting yourself at a disadvantage when you don't have to, especially initially sending things out, I would probably just leave it off. It's my thoughts on it.
Hey, I don't know if this is helpful, but I'm in Ontario and I'm applying to jobs in Montreal right now. And I've noticed I've also applied to jobs in Toronto, which is not like exactly where I live. It would be a considerable commute. And with the state of the lockdown here right now, almost everything is remote or hybrid. So I wouldn't I wouldn't put your address on the resume. Um, Unless maybe all your other experience was outside of Canada. It might be helpful to say that like you're in Newfoundland so that they already know that like you can work in Canada. Like that might be an exception, but right now with interviewing like in this area and Quebec and Ontario, lots of places are just like they'll ask, one of their first questions are, how quickly can you relocate?
Thanks, Caitlin, for that. That's a really good point. Especially now, it's timely. There's another question here. Is it okay if education section is added after work experience? Yes, it is, but I would be strategic. So if you're a new grad, I probably and your education is directly relevant to what you're applying for, and you really want to highlight that. And that's why, of course, we have that general order in the resume guide, because most folks are new grads. But some folks have a lot of great work experience, and that's the first thing that they want the employer to see, especially if it's professional experience. So yes, you absolutely can do that. There's a lot of depends when it comes to resumes. There's the general order, but those can be reversed depending on how senior you are, I guess, in your career. Hope that answers your question. I'm getting a private message, somebody who just joined now. How can they get the information? So if you're a graduate student, on Brightspace, there's a shell called Mon Graduate Commons, and the recordings for Edge and the slides, Edge events, including this one, will all be there. If you're not a graduate student, just email me and I'll make sure that you get them. Now, I want to share some of these. Look at the time here. Bear with me for a second while I get this open. I'll quickly go into some of these. This was and please let me know if what I'm talking about, and you're looking at it and you're thinking that's not what she's talking about, because I'll be clicking on different links. So either like speak up or put it in the chat. So what you should see right now is the study on the eye tracking recruiters. Won't go through that, but just to show you. And I think, well, of course, this one's 2018. Don't know if they've done this one for a couple of years. This is the Edge website, which since I'm on it, this was actually the page I wanted to show you. Since I'm on it though now, I will show you some other things. So let's go to first part. You can see we try to guide you right through with these tabs through your program, even before you start your degree. Wealth of information in there that I won't have time to go into, but you can look for. Here's an example of the Twitter feed. So you can see here, a reminder today, a last minute reminder for anybody who didn't see this before. I find that the Center for Social Enterprise often posts jobs for graduate students, and jobs for graduate students you don't often see posted. It's more for undergrads. So I always take advantage when I see certain departments, certain areas of the university and outside that are specifically asking for grad students. You'll might find anything here, just general tips. So it's really worthwhile following. Like I said, I do have Facebook as well, and I try to be consistent, but the Twitter would be definitely more effective. Okay, before I go to the page that I was on, here are the workshops and events, just like the one you're attending right now. This changes every semester. And for those of you who have been asking about the recordings and slides, it explains here at the top how to get them. So the link to the Graduate Commons is here. It even tells you that you have to go to toolboxes at the top to see the recordings. So this is here right above the events. There's lots here. You can see some of them are academic, some of them are more practical, career, some of them are not even events, some of them are just programs for graduate students. I try to keep everything together because I know, like I said, graduate students are busy. It can be very confusing when you're getting emails from everywhere. So I try to keep this as updated as much as possible. If other departments are having events that I think could help you as well, I will cross-post them here. So for a good example of that would be March 7th is Career Week. So career development through student life, they have a whole bunch of activities and events that I think are going to be very relevant. You can see during that time, I'm helping them out with 3 events. But when they have the schedule, I could tell people, go to career development, go to the website and look at it. But usually what I will do instead is cross-post it here, just so every single thing is in the Edge website. We want to make it as easy as possible. So these are just some of the highlights. You can see our thesis writing group, thesis writing retreat. It covers just about every topic. We also have a partnership with Athabasca. And there may be some students from Athabasca on this meeting today. So we post their events as well, which are all online, of course. So that's helpful. While I'm here, said there's a lot of things here that you can go into yourself. This is something new that a lot of students don't know about. We haven't really formally launched it yet, but it's operating. It's here. This is kind of a more formal way for you to recognize some of the things that you've done under Edge. So you can it's actually a certificate. These are all the requirements. Once you've completed the requirements, and we tell you what they are, we tell you where they come from, gives you time expectation, you can actually go to the Graduate Commons and request your certificate, and then I would approve it. For the most part, it does rely on the honor system, for completing these activities. I haven't found that to be an issue. I find most people who want to do this really want to get the most out of it. I still have to approve it. So if I have questions or, if I ask for links or anything like that, I can still do that. But wanted to draw your attention to this. If you have any questions about this at all, because this is very new, please let me know. We figured it was a way to formalize things and also a way to encourage students to attend some of these sessions. Because as an example, so today, as I mentioned at the beginning, there were 121 people registered for this. I can't see the number right now because I'm sharing my screen. But last time I looked, there was 20 odd people in this meeting. So that gives you an idea of the uptake. So the value of this can't be overemphasized. And I know everybody is fatigued with online activity. I am too. But even if there's certain things that you select, you don't have to attend everything. Certain things that you can do for yourself, that would be useful. So back to this. This page here is particularly relevant when you're close to finishing your degree. Here is the resume guide. Okay, so this is the PDF of the resume guide. It talks about and explains everything a lot more comprehensively than the slides do. So there's a big sample here. It'll tell you from top to bottom how to do a resume, also a cover letter. It gives you in the appendix at the back, it gives you a sample of a cover letter. It also gives you a list of action verbs. Also a CV guide, which is a separate guide and a separate presentation. And this is more of an academic document. It's sometimes good to look at both of these. Sometimes I find graduate students will use this format, which I think is the best format to use generally. But they look at the CV guide just to integrate some of the more academic titles that they might want to use. So this, like I said, is a little bit more detailed. Some of the links that are in the presentation are here as well. This link I definitely want to show you. This is in the presentation. I show all students this at every opportunity I can. And the first thing I'll say is that I recognize that it says transferable skills for PhDs in the humanities. Keep in mind, this could say masters, PhDs, it could say any field. It just happens to be what this example says. So Graduate students constantly undersell themselves and devalue the skills and experience they have, whether they're PhD, master's. You have a lot of skills and experience, competencies that you build in your program. If you only focus on the left-hand side, so in this case, and everyone's left-hand side is different. Depends if you're course-based, research-based, master's, PhD, depends on the program. This is just an example of someone who, wrote their academic skills, basically what they do in their program, and then translated it to what it means in the workplace. This is what's most important, and this is what students have the toughest time with. Or, knowing how to articulate it, or even believing that, okay, I didn't know that these things I do mean this. So I spend a lot of my time talking about that. This is another very important point to get from this presentation, not just for resumes, for interviews. Instead of thinking, I know many graduate students do have professional work experience, and that's great, but many don't. And if you're one of those that don't, this is really important. So I always encourage students to do their own inventory of academic skills and look at them through another lens to see, well, what is this going to mean for an employer? Well, how is this valuable to an employer who's not a faculty member? How am I going to get them to understand that what I've done is valuable? Again, this is one example of many. There's lots of resources like this on the internet. But I do want to show you this because I think it's a bit of a shift in thinking, and it's an important one. Thing on this page I want to highlight, and this will be the last thing on this page I'll highlight because there's a couple of links here that I want to show you. I recognize that these professional associations are ones that are relevant to Newfoundland and Labrador. These are everywhere. So if you're in technology, for example, you definitely want to know all about the TechNL website. This is an industry association. The membership are full of companies in this field. Same thing with oil and gas, same thing with environment, human resources. There's various ones here. St. John's Board of Trade, very, very general, which is good and bad. So you probably won't find something specific to your well, it's not all specific to your field, but you'll see companies there that have that represent various fields. So, I mean, I could make a whole day out of going into all the value of the Edge website. I won't do that, but you probably figured out by now that it's pretty important to have a look at these things yourself. All right. Close that. Right now, you should see the website with the balanced career, the different types of resumes. This just goes into a little bit more detail on what a chronological resume is and what the functional resume is. I like these links here on the action verbs. This gives some really, what I like about this is if you're trying, you led a project or you had a leadership role and you're trying to describe it, even had a conversation to an employer, let alone documents. These are just some basic tools to help you. Another similar one here. And actually this one talks about, and it's not that these verbs are wrong, it just talks about, some examples of some fresh language that you may want to use. This was the one I definitely wanted to show you. So this speaks to those phrases that I showed you in the presentation and the importance of expanding if you can. There's a lot of examples all over the internet about this. Some people call them accomplishment statements, value-added statements. There's another word, problem statements, challenge, action, result, just a way of thinking to describe your skills and your experience. So these examples are very, very specific. Some of them using specific numbers, that might not be relevant to you depending on your background and what you've done. But, here's an example. So host a networking events, increase membership, promote a community awareness. That's fine. It's totally fine. But if you're trying to quantify it and really show a result, the second one might be a bit better. And this is the part I like. It gives examples of quantitative and qualitative. I do know that these are very specific. I recognize that, and you may not be able to make them that specific. But it's, again, just a reminder of this is the way that you want to be thinking, rather than just listing, here's what I did. You want to have an accomplishment or a result, if possible. Spend too much time on that. I talked about that, using the wrong font, and it gives some examples. So yeah, so it gives them a few more examples of fonts to consider. How to decipher a job advertisement. I like this one. It's practical. Just gives you some bit more information. This is in the Edge website and in the presentation. Just talks about, cover letter is a big topic. Nobody wants to do a cover letter, including me. Um, it's really important. It needs to be detailed, and it needs to be focused on the job that you're applying for. And most of all, it needs to be well written. So any type of resources like that I can find myself and share with others, just to make it a bit easier to develop a cover letter, I will. So this one talks about, your strengths, and really spelling them out. So it speaks to those phrases actually that I just talked about. Treating your cover letter as a work plan. It's another way of looking at a cover letter. So here's what you would like to do in this role. You may have experience, you may not, but if you know a bit about the organization, you've read the job ad, you may be able to approach it. Maybe a good response to approach it this way. It's proactive as well, because it's kind of naming some of the things that you think are needed and what could be helpful. And again, here's where it's important to find out about the organization and the challenges, some of the things you might be doing, some of the things, like their mission, vision, and values, those types of things. This last part summarizes it well. Consider the problems that you'd be responsible for solving and summarize how you would solve them. Again, depends on the job. These are just different ways to do this. This is what I already showed you. I had this open. This is directly from the presentation and the Edge website. This is the link on 10,000 Coffees. And again, it's in the presentation. This just gives more information. And I also have still lost that one. This is global NL. That's the last slide of my presentation. In order to, like, as soon as you click on this, it'll tell you to sign in with your LinkedIn. So you can't really view the members or anything until you do that. But this would definitely be something that, especially if you're getting towards the end of your program, even at the beginning, it's so good to familiarize yourself with all this stuff. But the biggest thing, I think, with these presentations, what I try to get through is and avoid, because I see this a lot, are students and alumni getting to the end of their program or, graduated and panicked because they have not thought about any of this. And in fact, it was all there. So please share this as much as possible. Remember that it's open to everyone. If you know others that may be able to benefit, It's only grad students who can access the recordings and slides, but open to everyone. So please keep this in mind. Looking at a question here. Thank you, Ali, for putting my email in there again. Just let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. A one-page cover letter, but more than 4 paragraphs would be fine. I think so. It could be, depending on the relevancy. So as long as it wasn't redundant, as long as it wasn't repetitive, like you have a 5th paragraph, 4th paragraph, and really you could have had 4. If you feel that you need 5 paragraphs, I think for sure, yeah, you can do that. As long as it's, and again, you need to think about the spacing, right? You know, a readable font size, space between each paragraph. That helps. Right. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to stop the recording just in case